Hi, everybody. We're here to talk about Russian history, and we're here at Fort William Henry, one of Maine's prettiest little spots here in, I think it's South Bristol, or the village of Pemaquid itself. Either way, we're going to get to work. I've got my mug. You can't scare me. I'm a teacher. Nice. So today we're going to be talking about Russia. Ivan III helped make Russia a country by freeing it from the control of the Mongols. So the thing about Russian history in the 1300s and 1400s is that they were really not a country. They were made up of nation states. And one of these nation states was Moscow, or Muscovy. That one was controlled by Mongols. Some of the other city-states in Russia were controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Some were controlled by the Byzantine Empire. But in this case, Muscovy was under the control of the Mongols. His grandson was Ivan IV. He was a very, very important ruler. He got the nickname Ivan the Terrible, not for doing very nice things. In this case, he wasn't necessarily an awful ruler. He was more terrible towards the nobles who might rebel against him, just the same way that Louis XIV was terrible against his nobles. He struck terror in his enemies. In one case, he actually did something that was truly terrible, a couple of cases really, and we'll get to that. The Russian nobles were known as Boyars, B-O-Y-A-R-S, Boyars. So the Boyars made Ivan the Terrible's younger years pretty tense, pretty miserable. But at the age of 16, he was able to crown himself emperor, or Caesar, or in Russian, Czar, C-Z-A-R. At first, he ruled fairly and wisely, but his wife died in 1560, and Ivan kind of went off the edge. His behavior became paranoid and nasty towards people. He had his own secret police, and they would go around killing any boyars, any of the Russian nobles who spoke badly of him. He took land away from the old boyars, the nobles, and created a new class of nobles who would just be loyal to him. Kind of the same thing that Louis XIV did with his intendants, right? He took land away from those boyars. In 1581, he accidentally killed his own son. It appears as though what happened was his son had married a woman that Ivan wasn't really in approval of. And she was in their royal apartment, in her own private area of the royal apartments, with her husband, the prince. And Ivan went to visit them one day and discovered that she wasn't properly dressed according to his standards that he dictated to people. And his son started arguing with him. No, you came into our private part of the palace. You can't tell us how to dress in our private part of the palace. Well, the argument turned nasty. And Ivan had a scepter, a staff, a royal staff, that had a giant diamond or some other kind of precious stone on top of it. And Ivan, in the middle of this fight, just hit his son with it. And unfortunately, he hit his son in the head and cracked his skull open, killed his own oldest son, the heir to the throne. So Ivan the Terrible didn't have an heir to the throne anymore. On one occasion, there was a Russian city that was under siege by the Mongols, and they surrendered to the Mongols. Even though Ivan said, don't surrender, we're on the way, we're bringing an army to liberate you. Well, when Ivan got there, he had to liberate the city himself from the Mongols. And then he murdered every single person, man, woman, and child in the city as punishment for them surrendering to his enemies. And also, it was a way to send a message to all the other Russian cities. Don't surrender, because if you do, it won't keep you from dying. I'll kill you myself. So fight for Russia, stand for Russia, don't surrender to the enemy, because if you do, there's no way you're surviving. Either they'll kill you or I will. Charming, huh? So, Ivan the Terrible died, and there wasn't a good or capable ruler to take over. So for a period of years, there were civil wars and nastiness in Russia, called the Time of Troubles. In 1613, they managed to find a Russian noble that they thought would be weak enough but prestigious enough to become the new Caesar, the new Czar, Michel Romanov. And so the Romanov family took charge of Russia. He became the very first Romanov ruler in the dynasty, and that dynasty would go on for about 300 years. The very last Russian Tsar was a Romanov. So 300 years. In 1696, the greatest of all the Romanov rulers took charge. He actually had to get rid of his brother to do so, because he and his brother were both claimants to the throne. He had his brother put away and then killed, and his sister actually tried to rebel against him, and he stopped that rebellion and put her away. He was Peter the Great. Peter the Great. He was ruling a country that was basically not even modern European. They were more Asiatic. They were very much not the kind of country that England or France or Spain had become, very cultured, kind of snobbish. No, Russia was savage and barbaric at this point. Peter wanted Russia to become more European. Everything he tried to do was to make Russia more cultured. One of the big things that he did was he was like 6'4". He was gigantic. He was hard to try to disguise. But interestingly, he decided to go on a tour of Western Europe so that he could see all the technological advantages, the cultural advantages that these other places had. So Peter the Great claimed to be just a lower-ranking Russian noble on tour, and he left Russia after taking charge. While he was gone, his sister started a rebellion against him. That's when he crushed her rebellion and had the leaders of the rebellion, other than his sister, beheaded, and their heads put on spikes all over the city of Moscow, and his sister put away in a nunnery for the rest of her life. But the Boyars threw that revolution against him with the help of his sister. Now, while he was in Western Europe, he visited Paris. He saw Louis XIV's great country. He saw England at the time. He went to the Netherlands. People speculate about all the great inventors and thinkers that he might have met. So Peter went on this Russian tour. Part of the reason that he went on this Russian tour was because he had failed in his first war. He went to war against Sweden and Poland. He was hoping to get some ports. One of Peter the Great's super passions was to get ports so that they could sail out on the water, like what you see behind me. So Peter the Great tried to take land away from Sweden and Poland so that Russia could have a port that they could use. He failed, though, because the Polish army and the Swedish army were so much more technologically advanced than the Russian army. Russia had an army way bigger than any of those countries could put together, but they didn't have technology. And so Russia failed in Peter the Great's first war. He didn't want to fail again. He went on this tour of Western Europe to get new technology, to learn how to be a Western ruler, to learn how to modernize his country. He didn't want to keep the Church of Russia, the Orthodox Church, the same way that it used to be. He didn't want to leave it in the hands of the old-fashioned patriarchs of the church, the old men in charge. And so Peter the Great took charge of the Russian religion himself, kind of did an Elizabeth I or a Henry VIII or a Louis XIV, and made himself the head of the national religion. So he tried to westernize his homeland with tours of Western Europe. He replaced the nobles with intendants, just like the French Cardinal Richelieu had done under Louis XIII and Louis XIV. He forced people to pay heavy taxes so that he could modernize his army and even create a brand new navy, Russia's navy. Other ways that he westernized Russia was to introduce potatoes. This is huge. I've talked about the benefit of potatoes before. To get them in Russia suddenly was to mean that people didn't starve to death. People could work much harder. Babies didn't starve to death. More people were growing up to be adults. More people were living into old age. More people were having kids. So the population just boomed. The status of women increased in Peter the Great's Russia. And he forced the boyars, his nobles, to dress more like Western Europeans. He even created something called the beard tax. He didn't want his Russian nobles to have those giant, huge, grisly beards that Eastern European men had at that point. He wanted them to be more like the Dutch and the English and the French. So if you wanted to have one of those gigantic beards, you had to pay a special tax, a beard tax. And if you were caught outside with a beard that big and you didn't have your license with you, they would take you to jail. They would shave you and you'd serve a prison sentence and you'd pay a fine. And actually, we have some of those licenses still. The funny thing is they're coins. No face on the coin, just a beard. And so it's a faceless beard and mustache on a coin. That's your license to say that you've paid your beard tax. Peter, after he modernized Russia's military, he created a new port city. He beat Sweden. He took land away from Sweden, and he created a city that was going to be Russia's window to Europe so that he could sail out, so that he could have a navy that would sail and learn how Western Europe was doing. And he named it after his patron saint. Now remember, he's Peter the Great. He's going to name it St. Petersburg, yes. He had to turn a swamp into a port city. St. Petersburg was originally just marshland. So it was very expensive. It took a lot of time. And when he was done, he created a palace for himself, a winter palace in St. Petersburg that was almost as big, almost as beautiful, almost as impressive as Versailles was for Louis XIV. Peter the Great created a government system in 12 ranks so that it didn't matter how closely related you were to him. It didn't matter how influential and powerful you could be. You would not get promoted unless you were good at the rank that you were in. And then you would go up a stage in the 12 ranks. He expected every single nobleman to serve in either the church, the government bureaucracy, or the military. And every one of these three areas that they had to serve for their entire life had 12 ranks. You had to be good at the basic rank to get a promotion to the second rank up, to the third rank up, to the fourth rank. So it's called a meritocracy. You're promoted only on your merits, not on how closely related to the Czar you are, if you're the Czar's uncle, or if you're the Czar's brother-in-law. It doesn't matter. You've got to be good and you've got to get promoted all the way to the top. So that was Peter the Great's contribution to Russian history. Unfortunately, other than building a navy and having a port like the ocean that you see here, Peter's legacy was wiped away by the Czars who came after him. They didn't want to continue with a meritocracy when instead they could sell positions or they could just give positions to benefit people. So some of Peter the Great's legacy is still there, St. Petersburg, Russia, and Russian Navy. But some of the legacy, like the promotion based on merit, the 12-rank meritocracy, was wiped away after his death. That's a bit of Russian history for you. The next time we get together, we're going to take a look at English history in the 1600s. We're talking crazy kings, bloody civil wars, executions, uprisings, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of. We'll leave you to fill in the blank there. We'll see you next time, and that'll be a couple of days. See you soon.